Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a kitchen that smells like time itself. A haze of wood smoke, olive oil, and something faintly sweet that could be honey or history. The firelight flickers against clay pots. The air is thick with steam, and somewhere in that blur of scent and warmth, a Roman cook wipes his brow, mumbling about perfection. You wouldn't survive 5 minutes here. The heat alone feels like standing inside a loaf of bread that's still baking. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment telling me where you're listening from. Maybe it's night where you are, or maybe you're sneaking this in during a lazy afternoon. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself in ancient Rome, sometime around the 1st century. The empire hums with confidence. Marble walls, fountains, laughter spilling from taverns where wine is cheap and gossip is free. But deep inside one villa on the Bay of Naples, there's a different kind of magic at work. Here, food isn't just survival, it's theater. On a marble counter lies a scroll carefully unrolled beside baskets of figs and fresh herbs. Someone is writing. His name will echo through centuries. Marcus Gavius Apicius. You've probably never met anyone quite like him. A man so obsessed with flavor that he practically bankrupted himself chasing it. Picture him, draped in fine linen, nose twitching at the scent of roasting meat, like a philosopher who traded wisdom for taste buds. The world around him is loud, senators debating, soldiers marching, yet Apicius hears only the simmer of a sauce pot. He's convinced that Rome deserves to eat like gods, and maybe in his kitchen, they almost do. A young servant pours honey over roasted dormice. Yes, dormice, those tiny woodland creatures, while another stirs a mixture of fish sauce, wine and pepper until the air burns with salt and sweetness. It's a strange harmony, but to Apicius, it's poetry. He's recording everything, scribbling down ratios of vinegar to oil, the right moment to add mint to lamb, or how to disguise spoiled meat with cumin and bay leaves. Some call him genius, others think he's insane. Both might be true. You lean closer to his shoulder, the ink smells sharp like the tang of metal. His handwriting dances, curling Latin letters forming what will later be known as De Re Coquinaria, on the art of cookery. It's not the first recipe collection in history, but it's the one that survives, clinging to the ruins of time like ivy on stone. Outside, the streets are buzzing with vendors selling olives and goat cheese. Rome is hungry, always hungry, and Apicius feeds that hunger with ideas. He believes that cooking is more than taste, it's identity. Each spice, each herb, tells a story of conquest. Pepper from India, dates from North Africa, salt from the Alps. To eat like a Roman is to eat the world, but tonight, in this moment, you watch him pause. He dips a spoon into a pot and closes his eyes. The sauce thickens slowly, dark as polished bronze. He sighs, not from satisfaction but curiosity. What if it could be better? What if perfection exists just one flavor away? There's something oddly modern about that thought. You've met people like him, the artist tweaking one last brushstroke, the musician chasing a sound only they can hear. Apicius was the original food influencer, minus the ring light. His kitchen was his stage, his scrolls the captions beneath his culinary selfies. And yet there's a loneliness here too. His laughter fades when the pots quiet down. Outside, slaves extinguish torches one by one, and the villa sinks into night. The empire may stretch from Britain to Egypt, but Apicius's world ends at the edge of his kitchen table. You can almost hear him whisper, "Perfection costs everything." He doesn't know it yet, but his notes, smudged with oil and ash, will outlive him by millennia. They'll travel through wars, monasteries, royal kitchens, and revolutions. They'll cross languages and borders, reshaping how humans think about food itself. For now, though, the scroll is just paper. The ink hasn't dried. You can see a flyland near the corner, tiny legs brushing against a recipe for flamingo stew. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolls. Maybe a storm, maybe history itself beginning to turn. You take a slow breath. The firelight flickers and the air feels thicker. In that moment, you understand. This isn't just a recipe. It's the beginning of a legacy, simmering quietly in the heart of empire. And as the final coals die out, Apicius leans over his table, muttering, "Add a little more garum." You smile even centuries later, because every cook who's ever lived knows that feeling. The desperate, Beautiful need to make something just a little better. The night deepens and the embers in Apicius's kitchen fade to a warm red glow. You stay there, half in shadow, listening to the hiss of cooling bronze pots. The smell of pepper and honey still clings to your clothes. Somewhere in the dark, Apicius's voice murmurs to himself, as if reciting a prayer. The taste must surprise, but never betray. You watch him, the so-called gourmet of empire, a man whose name has become a verb among the wealthy. To Apicius, something means to make it extravagantly excessive. He's not a cook in the humble sense. He's a philosopher with a ladle. His audience? Senators, generals, and the ever-hungry elite of Rome, people who believe taste is proof of superiority. Apicius was born into comfort, but his real wealth came from his curiosity. He'd travel across the empire just to find a better fig, a fresher oyster, or a rarer spice. Once he supposedly sailed to North Africa after hearing the fish there tasted sweeter. When he discovered they were no different, he turned his ship around in disgust. Imagine flying halfway across the world for a slightly crispier croissant. Yeah, Apicius would have done it. You trail him through markets that never sleep. Lanterns swing overhead, casting trembling halos of light over stalls stacked with exotic treasures. Cinnamon from Ceylon, pepper from India, and saffron so costly it's guarded like gold. He moves through it all like a priest at altar, his fingers brushing jars of spice as if blessing them. The vendors whisper his name with reverence and a touch of fear. At home, his banquets are legend. Guests recline on couches beneath frescoes of Bacchus and Venus. Musicians play softly, while servants pour wine sweetened with honey and herbs. The air fills with the fragrance of roast boar glazed with dates, shellfish stewed in milk, and bread perfumed with rosemary. Apicius watches every reaction, every raised eyebrow, every sigh of delight, the way a playwright watches an audience during opening night. His favorite trick? Surprise. He once served pork that tasted exactly like wild duck just to prove he could fool a senator's tongue. Another time he dyed oysters with crushed violets to make them look like jewels. Food wasn't just sustenance. It was illusion, ambition, power. You can't help but chuckle. If Instagram existed back then, Apicius would have had 1 million followers and a cookbook deal with Caesar's publisher. But beneath the sparkle lies something sadder. Perfection is expensive, and not just in coin. Whispers begin to spread through Rome. Apicius is spending too much. His banquets grow bigger, his ingredients rarer. There's a story, half rumor, half truth, that he kept flamingos just to harvest their tongues, claiming it was the most delicate meat on earth. Whether that's true or just gossip, historians still argue about it. But they all agree on one thing: Apicius's obsession began to consume him. One evening, as the empire feasts without him, Apicius sits alone by the sea. You can almost hear the waves hitting the rocks, slow and rhythmic like a dying heartbeat. The man who once dazzled emperors now stares into the dark water, calculating what remains of his fortune. It isn't much. For the first time, he cannot afford luxury. And to him, that means he cannot afford to live. He hosts one final dinner. You're there, watching from the corner of a fading memory. The table gleams under lamplight. Wine, figs, honey cakes, fish cooked in its own skin until it shimmers like silver. The guests don't know it's a farewell. They toast, laugh, lick their fingers. Apicius smiles, but it doesn't reach his eyes. When the plates are cleared, he stands, thanks them, and retires to his chamber. Legend says he left behind a note. After tasting all there is, what remains? Some say he drank poison mixed with wine. Others think he simply walked into the waves. The truth is lost, like so many of his recipes, but his spirit lingers. You can feel it, faint as the smell of pepper still floating through the centuries. The scroll he left behind, Re Coquinaria, continues its journey. Passed from hand to hand, it will become both relic and roadmap for cooks long after Rome crumbles. You think of how fragile it all is. Taste, fame, legacy, yet somehow his passion survives every empire that burns down around it. That's the strange immortality of food. You eat, you forget, and yet something ancient stirs inside you every time you season a dish. A breeze sweeps through the ruined villa, rustling ashes into the air. For a moment, they swirl like ghostly flower, then vanish into the night. Somewhere far away, the first stars prick through the darkness. Apicius is gone. But his fire, the pursuit of beauty through flavor, still smolders. It will drift through centuries, finding new kitchens, new hands, new tongues to astonish, and as you turn to leave, the scent of his last meal follows you. Sweet, smoky, impossible to forget. The next night begins with the faint sound of sizzling, not the gentle whisper of olive oil, but a full orchestra of heat and scent. You're standing once more in the kitchen of empire, though centuries have blurred the edges. The marble floors are streaked with wine stains, and the air feels thick with indulgence. Here excess is not sin, it's performance. You lift the lid of a bronze pot and recoil slightly. Inside, a stew of pink tongues floats among herbs and peppercorns. Flamingo tongues, to be exact. They shimmer faintly, as if the birds still carried sunlight in their flesh. Apicius's disciples believed the tongue was the purest part of an animal, the place where flavor began its journey. You can almost hear him whisper through time. Only the rarest parts for the rarest minds. The Romans, of course, took luxury seriously. For them, food wasn't just about eating. It was a way to declare dominance over nature. They ate nightingales for their song, peacocks for their feathers, and fish so large they required entire crews to catch. In some banquets, dishes were presented still moving, proof that the cook had achieved impossible precision. You watch one of these feasts unfold. The guests recline on couches embroidered with gold thread. Slaves glide silently between them, pouring wine into cups carved from onyx. A massive platter arrives steaming. Inside, roasted dormice stuffed with minced pork, nuts, and honey. The scent is intoxicating, almost dizzying. Someone laughs, another moans softly at the taste. It's both beautiful and grotesque, like a perfume made from blood and roses. Apicius's recipes catalogue all of it. His scroll lists sources of vinegar, garum, that infamous fermented fish sauce, oil and herbs, combinations both brilliant and baffling. There's one for boiled ostrich seasoned with dates and mint, another for sea urchin custard. You can't tell if he's creating food or testing human limits. Modern chefs would probably call him a visionary. Others might call him a mad scientist with a pantry. But you can't deny the poetry in his madness. Each dish is a statement. We are Rome, we can afford to eat the impossible. Of course, not everyone admired such decadence. Stoic philosophers mocked it, calling it the sickness of the stomach. Soldiers returning from the frontier scoffed at these soft, perfumed citizens who couldn't survive a day without honeyed wine. Even among historians, there's still debate. Was Apicius's book a serious culinary manual or a satire of elite absurdity? Some suspect later copyists exaggerated the recipes just to make the upper class look ridiculous. Still, the details feel too vivid to be entirely fiction. You can almost see the glint of his knives, hear the rhythmic chopping, smell the sharp contrast between fish sauce and baked pear. You take a sip of imaginary Roman wine. It's thick, sweet, heavy, like someone melted raisins into fire. Your tongue tingles, your stomach protests. You mutter, "How did anyone survive this?" The ghosts of Roman diners around you grin. One raises a cup as if to say, survival is overrated. And yet beneath the opulence something profound lingers. These dishes weren't random acts of indulgence. They were experiments, early attempts to balance flavor, texture, temperature. The very foundations of what we now call fine dining were being written in those smoky kitchens. Without realizing it, Apicius and his successors were inventing gastronomy, the idea that taste itself could be studied, perfected, and written down. You wander deeper into the feast. The heat is overwhelming. Sweat beads along your neck. You catch sight of a young kitchen boy grinding pepper and cloves together, sneezing violently, but refusing to stop. His master's voice echoes, "A grain too little and the gods will frown." You smile at the absurdity and at how human it feels. Even then, perfection came down to a pinch, more or less, but something darker brews beneath the laughter. You notice servants collecting leftovers, entire trays of untouched delicacies, and carrying them outside. There in the alley behind the villa, the poor scrape at what's left. The empire's hierarchy is written not in law, but in the scraps of food. You feel a sting in your chest. This too is Rome's legacy. Later, as the feast winds down, the torches flicker low. Musicians play slower, softer. A senator drunkenly praises Apicius, claiming no man since Jupiter has eaten better. The host smiles, tired. He knows that even divine appetites fade. You linger a little longer, watching servants wash copper bowls in cold water. The bubbles pop, releasing faint scents of garlic and wine. It's oddly peaceful. The chaos of the feast dissolves into rhythm, water, clatter, breath. Maybe that's the hidden truth of Apicius's world. Behind every display of luxury lies a moment of silence where taste becomes memory. And memories, unlike flavors, don't spoil. The lamps go out one by one. The last thing you see before darkness swallows the room is a small note tucked under a wine cup. A recipe scrawled in hurried Latin. For a sauce of roses and pepper, add honey until the past becomes sweet. You breathe in the ghost of that sweetness as the night folds over you. The empire feasts unaware that one day its recipes, like its power, will be scattered to the winds. The next time you open your eyes, the laughter is gone. The air smells not of spice and wine, but of dust and smoke. Rome is quieter now, too quiet. You stand in what was once a bustling villa. Its mosaic floors cracked, its kitchen long cold. The empire that once dined on flamingo tongues and fig-stuffed dormice is breaking apart piece by piece, like stale bread left too long in the sun. You hear distant shouting, soldiers maybe. The streets tremble as carts rumble past, loaded with what's left of someone's fortune. Statues crumble, markets close. The city that once called itself eternal begins to forget the taste of luxury. Inside one abandoned home, a single parchment lies on the floor, its edges curled with heat. The ink has faded, but you can still make out fragments of recipes: wine, honey, garum. Simmer until fragrant. Someone once cared deeply about these words. Now they're just ash waiting for wind. The decline of Rome is less like a fall and more like a slow exhale. Trade routes shrink, spice ships stop coming. Pepper becomes rarer than pearls. The kitchens of empire grow silent, and the fine art of taste returns to survival. Bread, lentils, salt if you're lucky. The age of excess gives way to an age of hunger. You walk through the ruins listening. Every step echoes through time. Somewhere nearby a monk is chanting. The faint rhythm of Latin prayers replaces the clatter of feasts. Civilization hasn't ended. It's hiding. One night in a monastery perched above a river valley, a candle flickers beside a stack of crumbling scrolls. A young monk dips his quill in ink and begins copying what remains of a Roman text. He doesn't know it's Apicius. To him, it's just another relic, a fragment of pagan Rome that must be preserved for study. He copies every strange instruction. Boil flamingo and sweeten with honey. Use garum liberally, without judgment. But sometimes, when no one's watching, he chuckles softly at the absurdity. You lean over his shoulder as he writes. His breath smells faintly of ale and cold bread. The ink glistens under candlelight, wet and alive. He replaces words he doesn't understand with ones he does. Garum becomes salsamentum, a salt sauce. Flamingo becomes wild bird. Without meaning to, he's transforming Rome's cookbook into something new, something more practical. The recipes travel from one monastery to another across Gaul, down into Burgundy, then into the kitchens of medieval lords. Each copy adds, omits, or alters a little more. By the time it reaches the 9th century, Apicius is no longer just Roman. He's a ghost wearing a monk's robe, seasoning stews with fragments of memory. Outside the monasteries, Europe is dark. Roads crumble, towns vanish, yet in those quiet stone kitchens, something miraculous happens. The art of writing, the art of tasting, both survive. When you think about it, that's what saved civilization. People too stubborn to stop copying, even when no one seemed to care what they copied. You imagine one monk, older now, tasting his own stew, barley, onions, and a bit of dried fish. He frowns, adds a splash of vinegar, and mutters, "Needs balance." Without realizing it, he's echoing Apicius. A millennium apart, the same instinct stirs. Still, not everything endures. Some recipes vanish forever. Dishes that depended on extinct spices, lost fish, forgotten hands. Others morph beyond recognition. The famous Roman patina, a layered egg custard, evolves into something more familiar to your tongue. The medieval flan. You almost smile at that. History, after all, is just leftovers reinvented. As the centuries pass, the monks' copies spread into private collections. Nobles brag about owning ancient Roman cookbooks, though most can't read a word of Latin. A few chefs, curious or bold, experiment with the recipes. One tries boiling meat with dates and cumin. It smells awful. Another accidentally discovers a sauce worth keeping. Wine reduced with herbs and broth. The seeds of French cuisine are quietly being planted in borrowed soil. Meanwhile, outside these quiet rooms, Europe changes again. New kingdoms rise. Old roads reopen, spices return, look cautiously like travelers unsure of their welcome. With them comes the taste of memory, the faint perfume of Rome. Historians still debate how much of Apicius truly survived. Some say the monks' copies were full of errors, others that the flavor of Rome was too bold to disappear entirely. Maybe the truth lies somewhere in the middle, in the way a faint aroma lingers even after the pot's been scrubbed clean. You stand now at the window of that monastery. Below, a river glitters like a thin ribbon of silver. The monk's candle burns lower. He doesn't know that centuries from now, people will study this very moment, that his patient copying will become the thread connecting Rome to Paris, empire to elegance. The parchment curls again in the heat, and a drop of wax falls onto the words "simmer until soft" and "serve while warm." The instruction could just as easily apply to history itself. You follow the faint scent of smoke and stewing meat through a stone corridor, its walls breathing with the damp chill of centuries. The clatter of pots echoes softly, almost like the rhythm of prayer. Somewhere behind a wooden door, a monk sneezes, probably from too much pepper. You push it open and warm air spills out. Welcome to the kitchen of St. Martin Abbey, somewhere in medieval France, the heart of silence and somehow the birthplace of flavor. Here in this quiet world of ink, parchment and incense, the spirit of ancient Rome is still alive, but in disguise. The monks, heads bowed over candlelight, copy sacred texts by day and forgotten recipes by night. Their fingers are stained not only with ink, but with sauce. You lean closer to one of them, watching his quill dance across the page. At the top, in elegant Latin, you read a name you've seen before: Apicius. The Roman cookbook that once fed emperors now survives in whispers between psalms. But not every monk is faithful to the text. Some add little notes in the margins. Add garlic if the Lord allows. Better with wine. Or your favorite: too salty. Brother Pierre's fault. Their edits are acts of rebellion as much as devotion. And through these tiny tweaks, Roman taste slowly becomes medieval comfort food. Outside, the abbey garden hums with bees. The monks grow herbs, sage, thyme, and parsley, not for luxury but for healing. Yet every now and then, a sprig of rosemary finds its way into a pot of stew. You can almost hear the sizzle, smell the earthy sweetness. The recipe, once meant for Roman nobles, is now shared among men who've taken vows of poverty. There's something poetic about that, the empire's indulgence reborn in humility. As night falls, you sit beside the hearth with a bowl of their stew. It's thick, rich, and fragrant with something oddly familiar. Fermented fish sauce, perhaps. Yes, the monks have their own version of garum, made from anchovies and sea salt. Some historians still argue whether this was an intentional preservation of Roman taste or just practical recycling. Either way, the flavor bridges 1,000 years. You take a spoonful and feel history melt on your tongue. The abbot walks in, stern face, gentle eyes, and reminds the kitchen that dinner must be ready before Vespers. You hide your bowl, pretending to pray. He doesn't notice. Or maybe he does, but mercy tastes better than punishment tonight. Later, you wander into the scriptorium, where rows of manuscripts dry like leaves. On one table lies a nearly complete copy of Re Coquinaria. The margins glimmer with gold leaf. The ink smells faintly of iron and wine. One monk looks up and whispers, "We save the soul of Rome one recipe at a time." You nod, feeling the weight of centuries in that single sentence. There's a soft irony here. In a world where time seems frozen, food becomes motion. While empires crumble and kings forget their names, flavor keeps moving, slipping from scroll to spoon, from tongue to memory. The monks may not realize it, but they're not just copying texts. They're keeping taste itself alive. You notice one of them experimenting by the window, a young monk stirring a sauce with nervous focus. He adds honey, then vinegar, then a splash of wine, mumbling something like a prayer. When he finally dips his spoon, his eyes widen. "Sweet, sour, divine," he exclaims before remembering to whisper again. You can't help but smile. If TikTok existed, he'd be viral by now. The abbey bell tolls. Candles flicker. The monks line up for their evening meal. In this moment, surrounded by simple bread and steaming broth, you realize that the story of cooking has never been about luxury. It's about continuity. Each ladleful carries a fragment of the past. Somewhere deep in this monastery, Rome still breathes through the aroma of simmering sauce. Outside, snow begins to fall, blanketing the world in silence. The abbey's smoke rises like a prayer into the night. You step out, the scent of herbs clinging to your robe, and glance back once more. Behind those walls, history is simmering quietly, patiently, like a pot left on low heat for centuries. You smile, whispering to yourself, Apicius would have been proud. Then you keep walking, following the smoke into the next century. The snow outside the abbey has long melted by the time your journey continues. The year is changing. The world is stirring again. You can smell it before you see it. A faint exotic sweetness drifting through the markets of Venice, carried by men with sunburned faces and ships heavy with treasure. Cinnamon, pepper, nutmeg. Tiny things that once crossed deserts and oceans now roll between curious fingers. The whisper of spices has returned, and with it the ghost of Rome begins to breathe once more. You follow that scent across Europe, winding through narrow streets and smoky kitchens. In the royal courts of France, pots bubble again with ambition. A little pepper in the stew, a sprinkle of clove in the pie. Small rebellions against blandness. The monks may have preserved Apicius's recipes, but now kings and merchants are hungry for something bolder. Flavor has become a new kind of power. You step into a bustling kitchen in Paris where a cook, sleeves rolled high, eyes sharp, is stirring a sauce that smells faintly of the East. The Venetians brought it, he says, nodding toward a pouch of spice. Gold dust for the tongue. He laughs, but there's reverence in his voice. Every pinch of cinnamon is worth a coin. Every grain of pepper could buy a prayer. The cook lifts a pot lid and steam fills your face, rich, perfumed, layered like a story told by generations. Inside, beef simmers slowly with onions, wine, and a hint of something you can't quite place. Then it hits you, a fragment of Apicius's Rome reborn through medieval hands. Once these flavors belonged to emperors. Now they dance on the tongues of courtiers and kings. It's as if time itself has decided to season the world again. In the great halls of Europe, dining has turned into theater. The table is a stage, the dishes are performances, and spices are the script. You watch as nobles gasp over candied fruits and saffron-laced sauces. Behind every elegant gesture, you can sense a competition. Who can recreate the lost magnificence of Rome without admitting they're imitating it? Some historians still argue whether these recipes were rediscovered by chance or by memory. But you know better. Nothing that smells this ancient is ever truly forgotten. You wander south toward Provence, where the air is thick with rosemary and smoke. Peasants stir pots of stew over open fires, not realizing that their rustic meals echo the same patterns, once written by Apicius himself. Meat, herbs, oil, and thyme. The ingredients have changed, but the philosophy remains. Food as comfort, as pleasure, as proof that the world can still be beautiful even when uncertain. One evening, in a manor kitchen near Avignon, you find a cook bent over a scroll. He squints at the Latin words, his lips moving softly as he translates. Wine, honey, pepper, and fish sauce. He frowns, then replaces it with anchovy paste. A small change, but one that will ripple through centuries. You watch him taste the result, nodding with quiet pride. Innovation, it seems, has always been born from necessity and a little curiosity. Outside, the spice trade keeps growing, binding continents together in invisible threads. Ships creak under the weight of sacks filled with pepper and cloves. You hear sailors gossip about faraway ports, Calicut, Alexandria, Constantinople. To most, spices are wealth. To you, they are memory, drifting back across time like the scent of an old kitchen you once knew. Back in France, the nobility begins to compete in extravagance. Banquets become battlegrounds of aroma and color. One duchess demands her chef use so much saffron that the chicken glows like sunrise. Another orders her pastries dusted with crushed pearls, edible beauty for a fleeting moment. You chuckle softly. Instagram would have loved her, you whisper to yourself. Yet beneath the sparkle and perfume, the essence of Apicius hums quietly. His belief that food should excite the senses, stir the imagination, and reflect the soul of its maker. It's all here, dressed in silk and silver instead of togas. Some chefs even quote fragments of his text, as if reciting holy verses. They don't call it Roman anymore, but the DNA is unmistakable. One rainy night, you find yourself in a tavern at the edge of the Rhone. A weary traveler shares a bowl of thick stew with you. It's simple: beef, onions, herbs, and a touch of spice, but it warms your hands and your heart. "Came from the monks," he mutters between bites. "They say it's ancient." You smile, savoring the irony. The dish that once adorned the tables of emperors now feeds strangers in the dark. That's how true flavor survives, by adapting, by hiding in plain sight. As you leave, the tavern door creaks shut, and the scent lingers on your clothes: pepper, smoke, and wine. The whisper of spices is now a song, faint but steady, weaving through the air of medieval France. Somewhere between faith and fire, between parchment and pot, Rome's lost cookbook continues to write itself, not with ink, but with taste. You walk on, through markets and monasteries, through laughter and hunger, and though no one speaks Apicius's name aloud anymore, every spoonful, every simmering pot, every sigh of pleasure at the dinner table carries a secret message. The Romans are still here, in flavor if not in form. And as you drift onward into the next century, the night wind carries with it a gentle promise that taste, like history, never truly fades. It just changes its spice. You step into a kitchen that hums like a living organism, iron pots breathing steam, copper pans glowing like miniature suns, and the clatter of knives echoing through vaulted stone. This is not just any kitchen. This is the beating heart of Charlemagne's court. The air smells of roasted meat and ambition. You slip past a row of servants fanning the fire. Their faces shine with sweat and reverence, because here to serve food is to serve power. Charlemagne himself dines beyond the heavy oak door, and the dishes that reach his table decide who rises and who falls. You catch the scent of honey glaze and cloves, and somewhere, a monk-turned-cook whispers a blessing that sounds suspiciously like a recipe. Every meal, one old cook mutters, is a sermon. He's right. You can taste theology in the sauce, thickened with breadcrumbs, enriched with almond milk, spiced with meaning. Each plate is a message. The emperor is divine, the empire eternal. It's political cuisine disguised as comfort food. You lean closer to a bubbling pot and realize something odd. The recipe feels familiar. Anchovy paste, wine reduction, herbs boiled 3 times until they surrender. You remember Apicius, the Roman gourmet from long ago. Somehow his ghost has made it across centuries, sneaking into the imperial broth. Historians still debate whether Charlemagne's chefs actually studied Roman texts, or if culinary memory simply trickled down like a rumor, from noble feasts to monasteries, from monks to royal tables. Either way, you can almost hear Apicius chuckling somewhere between the pots. "I told you," his voice might say, "flavor is power." Then time shifts again. You blink and find yourself in another kitchen, this one under the rule of King Louis IX. Gone are the rough stone walls. Here marble counters gleam and tapestries of hunting scenes hang above the hearth. The cooks wear linen hats and speak in soft French accents that sound like simmering soup. You watch a young apprentice stir a sauce, terrified that a single clump will cost him his job. The head chef circles like a hawk, muttering about texture and timing. "A king's meal must have rhythm," he says. Every bite should feel like a procession. You almost laugh at the idea that food could march. But then you taste the dish in your imagination, and yes, it does move. It begins rich and heavy, then ends light and bright, like the arc of a symphony. Outside, trumpets announce the arrival of the king. Inside, the cooks line up, trembling. The plates are carried out one by one. Roasted quail wrapped in grape leaves, saffron broth with pearls of fat floating like tiny suns. The same pattern repeats as in Rome. Excess disguised as grace, indulgence as ritual. You can't help but notice how history loves to repeat itself, especially when butter is involved. There's a rumor whispered among the scullions that a secret book circulates between royal kitchens. Her faded manuscript said to contain recipes from the ancients. No one knows where it came from. Some say it was stolen from a monastery. Others believe it was a gift from Venice. You picture a chef centuries after Apicius, tracing Latin words with a greasy thumb, wondering how much garum to add to the emperor's stew. As you listen, you realize this is no ordinary kitchen. It's a bridge, connecting Rome's marble feasts to France's golden banquets. The cooks are alchemists, turning salt into prestige, bread into obedience, and appetite into art. One servant passes you a small piece of roasted meat. It melts on your tongue, smoky and tender, with a strange sweetness that lingers like a secret. "We call it civet," he whispers. The sauce comes from an old Roman trick, but don't tell anyone. His Majesty prefers to think it's French. You smile. Cultures never die. They just change their seasoning. The fire pops. The king laughs in the next room. And for a moment, you feel as if you're standing inside time itself, that invisible kitchen where all eras simmer together, flavors mixing across centuries. You think back to those monks who once copied recipes by candlelight, and how their quiet devotion ended up here, in this palace of silver spoons and golden bowls. You wonder if they'd approve. Probably not, though they'd likely appreciate the sauce. Some historians still argue about where the art of haute cuisine truly began. Was it born in the opulence of Rome, or in the discipline of medieval France? No one agrees, but as you listen to the soft scrape of ladles and the murmur of cooks, you realize the answer doesn't matter. The essence of it, the desire to impress, to comfort, to create something fleeting yet eternal, has always been the same. A drop of sauce lands on your sleeve. You lick it off. It tastes of time, old, sweet, and slightly smoky. The kitchen grows quiet. The night deepens. And somewhere behind layers of history you hear it again, that faint whisper of Apicius, still seasoning the world with memory. You're still standing near the fire when the smell of wood smoke fades into something softer, butter melting, wine simmering, and the faint perfume of time. The kitchen around you changes again. Stone turns to brick, torches to candles, and the sound of armor clanging outside is replaced by the chatter of Parisian streets in the 1300s. You're in a French kitchen now, not the thunderous halls of kings, but the quieter, cleverer realm of early refinement. Here food has begun to speak a new language, less about conquest, more about taste. The chefs wear clean linen and argue in whispers about texture, balance, and color. One of them dips a spoon into a sauce, frowns and mutters, "Too Roman." Another replies, "Then add wine." That's the shift you can feel in the air, the merging of two worlds. The old Roman confidence, all garlic and garum, is now learning to behave itself under French restraint. You can almost hear Apicius sigh in amusement as butter starts replacing olive oil. You move closer to a table where a chef is arranging roasted pigeon on a silver platter. He brushes it with a mixture of honey and vinegar, then sprinkles herbs in a careful, almost mathematical way. "It must look like a poem," he says. You realize that for him, cooking isn't survival, it's composition. If a Roman cook sought to impress with grandeur, a French one now aims to seduce with elegance. In the corner, an apprentice reads aloud from a worn Latin manuscript, a recipe for lentil stew from centuries ago. "Boil until tender," he says, "then mix with wine, pepper, and lovage." The master interrupts, "Add onions and butter instead." You smile. There it is again, the old world being rewritten one bite at a time. Outside, the 100 Years' War rages on, but inside the kitchen, peace simmers. It's the 14th century, and France is discovering that refinement can be power too. Nobles want sophistication on their plates, not just meat. Their banquets have rules now. Every dish follows a pattern, from delicate soups to roasted meats, then sweet pastries scented with rosewater. A sense of progression, of story, sneaks into the meal itself. You watch a nobleman's servant carry out a steaming pie decorated with pastry leaves and gilded edges. "For Lady Jean," the chef says proudly. "She wants her dinner to look like Versailles." You resist the urge to tell him Versailles hasn't been built yet, but he's right. The idea of culinary theater has begun. Somewhere between the platters and goblets, a truth begins to form. The French aren't just cooking, they're editing Rome. Every sauce, every roast is a negotiation between past and present, and yet the fingerprints of Apicius remain. You taste it in the way spices are balanced, in how sweetness no longer overwhelms but whispers. The Roman instinct for drama now wears silk gloves. You lean over a copper pot and watch a sauce thicken. Here it's made with reduced wine, marrow, and herbs, almost the ancestor of demi-glace. The cook adds a splash of vinegar, and the scent makes your eyes sting with pleasure. "This," he says proudly, "is how France eats." A moment later, he confides, "Though sometimes when I can't sleep, I dream of fish sauce." You laugh quietly. Even chefs of refinement crave a little barbarism. Historians still debate when exactly French cuisine became French. Some trace it to these very kitchens. Others argue it came later, under the flamboyance of the Renaissance. But in this moment, standing here, you can sense the transformation. It's like watching handwriting evolve. From bold Roman capitals to graceful French script, a young cook approaches you, carrying a bowl of soup so smooth it reflects the candlelight like glass. Potage, he calls it, for the bishop. You take a spoonful. It's warm, subtle, layered, almost moral in its restraint. Then he grins and says, "We used the leftover bones from yesterday." So much for divine elegance. You nearly choke, trying not to laugh. As you wander through the kitchen, you notice the rhythm of life here. Someone stirs, someone tastes, someone prays for more salt. You hear laughter too, a joke about how garlic is a sin from the south. The French palate is getting lighter, the humor sharper. Even indulgence now comes with irony. At the edge of the room, an older chef hums while he works. You ask what he's making, and he points to a small pot. "Ragout," he says simply. You cook it slowly with wine and patience. Rome taught us to season, but patience, that's French. The thought lingers as the night deepens. Outside, bells toll over the city, and the cooks pack away their herbs and knives. The fire dies to a warm glow. For a moment, you think you see Apicius's shadow again, leaning by the window, nodding, perhaps even smiling. His recipes have traveled far, wearing new clothes, speaking new words. But they're still alive. You rest your hands on the counter, feeling the warmth seep into your palms. You've watched cuisine change from empire to elegance, from spectacle to art. The Roman instinct to impress has survived, just translated into a different dialect, one of sauces, symmetry, and quiet confidence. Somewhere in this kitchen, between the whispers of butter and wine, France has found its voice. And as the candles flicker out, you realize refinement isn't the death of appetite. It's just appetite learning how to whisper. The night air feels heavier now, scented with parchment dust and oil lamps. You wander through the echo of turning pages, faint whispers of ink brushing paper. Somewhere in a small Italian study, a monk bends over an ancient text, his quill trembling slightly as he copies the Latin words De Re Coquinaria, the lost cookbook of Apicius, resurfacing after centuries beneath the silence of empires. You lean over his shoulder. The letters flow like tiny rivers of black wine, each stroke reviving a taste that had nearly vanished. The monk doesn't know it yet, but he's about to reawaken Rome's appetite. He thinks he's preserving history. In truth, he's stirring a hunger that Europe forgot it had. The manuscript he copies is fragile, patched, incomplete, missing pages where time has eaten the parchment. Still, it glows faintly under the candlelight, as if the recipes themselves remember the warmth of old kitchens. Roast peacock, honeyed dormouse, a sauce made from the fermented guts of fish, garum, the scent of empire. You smile quietly. You've smelled worse things on modern diets, haven't you? Some influencer somewhere would probably call garum the original umami cleanse. As the monk copies, you notice small changes, a few words softened. Measurements guessed. He replaces rare herbs with what he knows, rosemary, thyme. He doesn't just preserve, he translates. Through his hand, the past becomes edible again. When he finishes, he binds the pages in leather, careful but not perfect, and hides the volume in the monastery library. Decades pass, dust gathers. Wars come and go, but the book waits, patient as dough before it rises. One stormy evening, centuries later, a scholar from Florence stumbles upon it. You watch him blow the dust away and blink as if struck by lightning. "Apicius," he whispers, and his voice cracks. He turns the pages with reverence, reading lines about flamingo tongues and peppered wine. His pupils widen, not from hunger but from awe. He doesn't just see a cookbook. He sees a bridge, a link between the decadence of Rome and the discipline of the Renaissance. To him, this isn't a relic, and it's a roadmap. And as he copies it once again, he makes choices too. Latin becomes Italian. Garum becomes anchovy essence. Ingredients shift, evolve, modernize. Some historians still argue whether that monk's copy was truly faithful to Apicius, or whether it was already half a reinvention. Maybe both are true. Every translation, after all, is a confession of taste, of time, of what one civilization can stomach from another. You follow the new copy as it travels, packed carefully among other manuscripts bound for Paris. There, among scholars and courtiers, it's greeted with fascination. Imagine it. Noblemen in powdered wigs reading about flamingo tongues, trying to imagine how such a thing would taste. Some laugh. Others take notes. One particularly daring chef, you can almost see him now, sleeves rolled up, face glowing by firelight, decides to try one of the ancient recipes. He can't find flamingos, of course, so he substitutes chicken. He adds wine, butter, herbs. When he tastes it, his eyes flicker open, not because he's discovered something new, but because he recognizes something ancient, a richness that feels familiar yet foreign. He serves it to a patron who declares it divine. Thus, a Roman flavor returns to France in disguise. You drift among kitchens where scholars and chefs debate by candlelight. Is this still Apicius, they wonder? Or is it something new entirely? They don't know they're participating in a quiet revolution, the rebirth of an empire through taste. One young cook, writing in the margin of his manuscript, scribbles, "We cook as they dreamed." His handwriting trembles, but his words will survive for centuries. Outside, the night deepens. The rain against the window sounds almost like the hiss of meat on hot bronze. The book of Apicius rests again, heavier now with additions, annotations, interpretations, waiting for yet another pair of hands to find it. And you, standing in that flickering half-dark, can almost hear the hum of time itself. Not ticking, not running, but simmering. Slow, steady, fragrant, like a stew that's been on the fire since Rome, waiting for you to taste it. The air shifts again, softer now, scented with butter, smoke, and roasted pheasant. You follow the faint clink of cutlery through candlelit halls until you find yourself in a dining chamber lined with velvet and silver. The Renaissance has arrived, and France is hungry for beauty. You stand beside a long oak table where nobles in jeweled sleeves recline, not quite sure whether they should eat or admire what's in front of them. Golden pies shaped like swans, whole fish reassembled with gilded scales, and towers of sugar so delicate they could shatter if anyone breathed too hard. Welcome to the 16th century, where art and appetite have become the same thing. Someone just dropped a fork, which makes sense. Forks are still new here. They came from Italy, brought by travelers who saw them in the East, and at first people called them unholy little pitchforks. You can imagine the confusion. Eating spaghetti with your hands is one thing, but try explaining the point of 3 tiny metal teeth. Still slowly etiquette bends, and eating becomes performance. A kind of theater where taste and elegance must always appear effortless. You drift closer to the kitchen, where the real show begins. The cooks here are half scientists, half magicians, armed with mortar and pestle instead of wands. The scent of wine sauce thickened with flour, meat browned to perfection. It feels like alchemy. The heat wraps around you like velvet, and for a second, you could almost believe you're standing in the same warmth that once filled Apicius's Roman kitchen. One young chef hums while stirring a pot of red wine and herbs. He doesn't know the name Apicius, but his hands move the same way, balancing salt and sweetness, layering flavor like memory. He learned from a book copied in Italy, itself copied from a manuscript found in an old monastery. Recipes travel like ghosts, slipping quietly across borders and tongues until no one remembers where they began. You glance over his shoulder. On his table there's a recipe titled Sauce for Roasted Game. It calls for wine, pepper, thyme, and something called anchovy essence. You grin. There it is again. The whisper of garum, the Roman fish sauce reborn. Except now it smells of refinement, of France. The head chef bursts in, robes flaring like a general's cape. He tastes the sauce, nods approvingly, and declares, "Perfect, tastes noble enough for the Duke." Then he adds, "Next time, more butter. Always more butter." You suppose that's how civilization progresses, butter by butter. As you move through the kitchen, you notice the tool, gleaming knives, copper pots. Sieves, all designed not just for function but for beauty. The Renaissance believed that if God was in the details, then perfection must start with cookware. Even the way bread is scored feels intentional, almost reverent. Later that night, you follow the finished dishes back to the banquet hall. Music swells, goblets clink, laughter ripples like light across wine. Every dish is a message, not just of taste but of power. To dine like this is to prove your civilization has triumphed over hunger, over chaos, over time itself. But as you watch, you catch something deeper. Beneath the laughter and perfume, beneath the glint of gold, the same Roman impulse flickers. The urge to impress, to outshine, to leave a mark not just on the palate, but on memory. Apicius would have understood this world perfectly. You lean on the window frame, watching smoke curl into the evening sky. The city glows beyond. Paris, still raw, still restless, learning how to feed its ambition one course at a time. Down in the streets, the poor gnaw crusts of bread, while above, nobles taste eternity in a single bite of roast duck. Some historians still argue whether this moment, this glittering age of banquets, was truly the birth of French cuisine, or just Rome reborn in finer silk. But as the night deepens, you suspect it doesn't matter. Every civilization rewrites its hunger. Every meal is an echo of the one before. You take one last look at the table, at the steam, the laughter, the way candlelight dances on the rim of a silver cup, and it feels as if time itself is feasting. The sounds soften, the air thickens with warmth and wine, and for a brief, delicious moment you can't tell if you're in the Renaissance or still wandering the kitchens of Rome. The kitchen is quieter now. The clatter of iron pots gives way to the gentle bubbling of something thick and fragrant. You lean closer to the copper pan, and the air fills with the buttery perfume of flour meeting fat. A roux, the start of something miraculous. Tonight you're not just watching a cook, you're witnessing a revolution. A sauce revolution. You blink and the scene shifts. The Roman world's beloved garum, that pungent fermented fish sauce, lingers like a ghost in the air. In its place, the cooks of medieval France are stirring new dreams into their cauldrons. No more overpowering salt or stench of the sea. Now it's about balance, about elegance, about transforming chaos into harmony on a spoon. You dip your finger into the bubbling liquid, smooth, pale, delicate, and you realize this isn't just food. It's philosophy. The cook beside you, a stout man with a serious brow and hands dusted in flour, stirs the pot as though reciting a prayer. Sauce veloutée, he whispers like invoking a saint. You catch a glint in his eyes, the pride of someone crafting something truly French yet deeply ancient. There's a faint trace of Apicius here, hidden behind the gentleness of cream and stock. The spirit of the Roman gourmet lingers, invisible but undeniable, as if he's chuckling from another century. Ah, you see, you've just disguised my garum in silk. You imagine Apicius walking into this kitchen. He'd probably demand more spice, maybe a splash of wine, and absolutely insist on a golden bowl to serve it in. He'd tease these French chefs for their restraint. Yet even he might fall silent when the cook lifts the spoon and lets that velouté stream down like molten light. It's refinement distilled, a quiet defiance against the coarseness of the past. There's a saying that every civilization rewrites its hunger. Rome sought glory in excess. France sought beauty and restraint. And sauces became the bridge between the two, a way to say we remember but we've evolved. You can almost hear the two worlds whispering through time, garlic and garum giving way to cream and clove. In one corner of the kitchen, a younger apprentice sneaks a taste. His face lights up. "It's like silk," he says, grinning. The older cook sighs, half amused. "No, boy," he replies, "it's civilization." You chuckle. That's the kind of quote people would frame above their stoves centuries later, not realizing it started in a kitchen smaller than your apartment. As you linger, you realize that sauce, that subtle simmering magic, is more than a flavor. It's a statement. To the French, it became a language. How you cooked was how you spoke to the world. You could whisper with a velouté, argue with an espagnole, or seduce with a béchamel. And the best cooks? They didn't shout. They let their sauces speak softly like poetry. But not everyone agrees on where these silken ideas began. Some culinary historians still argue, was it truly the French who invented the art of sauce? Or were they perfecting what Apicius started? His ancient recipes mention thickeners, reductions, and emulsions, all buried under Latin words that sound like spells. Maybe those old Roman chefs would have recognized these French kitchens instantly, just with better table manners. You walk closer to the hearth and notice how the cook doesn't rush. Every movement has purpose. The sprinkle of salt, the swirl of the spoon, the careful tasting. It's slow, meditative, like calligraphy. You think of how fast everything moves in your own time. Instant noodles, microwave dinners, notifications every second. And suddenly, this rhythm feels sacred. Someone brings in a platter of roasted quail, golden and glistening, and the sauce is ladled over it. The steam carries notes of thyme, butter, and quiet pride. You taste it, and for a moment the centuries collapse. The bite is soft, elegant, and hauntingly familiar, as if some part of you remembers garum too, deep in your ancestral tongue. It's strange how flavors outlive empires. Stones crumble, kings fade, but taste persists. Maybe that's why cooks are the true historians. They don't write in ink, but in flavor. You can burn a manuscript, but you can't erase the memory of warmth, of taste, of shared hunger. The apprentice asks the cook if he'll ever write these recipes down. The old man shrugs. Maybe, he says, but the sauce won't taste the same on paper. You smile. Apicius would have disagreed. He wrote everything down, chasing immortality through ink. And yet perhaps both men were right. One left words, the other left taste. Together they made time delicious. You watch the light fade, the sauce thicken, and the cooks tidy their tools. In that quiet glow you feel something shift, not just in history but in yourself. You understand why food is never just food. It's memory, invention, defiance, and love simmered together. The sauce on your tongue isn't Roman or French anymore. It's human. The apprentice blows out the candle. The scent of butter and thyme lingers, wrapping around you like a blanket. You let out a slow breath, feeling the warmth fade into stillness. Somewhere across the centuries, Apicius smiles, and you, well, you're still hungry, but in the best possible way. The scent of roasted meats and warm butter follows you down a long, gilded corridor. Candles flicker against mirrors that seem to stretch into infinity. You hear laughter, music, the faint clinking of silver on porcelain. Versailles is awake, and you somehow are standing right in its golden belly. The kitchens are nothing like the quiet monastic ones you passed before. Here everything hums like a living machine. Dozens of cooks move in rhythm, chopping, stirring, flambeing, shouting orders over the hiss of oil. The walls gleam with copper pots. The floors smell of wine and ambition. And in the middle of it all, Louis XIV's court is feasting. You peek through the doorway into a room blazing with chandeliers. The king himself sits beneath a halo of crystal light, his powdered face serene, his wig taller than a wedding cake. Around him, courtiers, dukes, duchesses, and plates upon plates of food so extravagant you can barely identify them. This is where power eats. You catch sight of a dish being carried past, a pie in the shape of a swan, its neck arched proudly, its feathers sculpted from dough, glazed until they shimmer like ivory. The scent, cinnamon, clove, roasted almonds, makes your stomach growl. Somewhere behind it, another tray holds tiny pastries filled with creams and meats, meticulously layered like edible architecture. You lean closer and hear one of the chefs mutter, half joking, half proud, "The king may rule France, but I rule his hunger. He's not wrong." In Versailles, chefs are both servants and sorcerers. They control moods, forge alliances, and sometimes even manipulate the favor of the crown. One perfectly balanced sauce at a time. La Varenne, the man many call the father of modern French cooking, moves through the kitchen like a general surveying his troops. You watch as he corrects a young apprentice's grip on a knife. Gently, he says, "Food is not the enemy." His tone is soft, but his eyes are sharp. You realize this is no ordinary kitchen. It's a stage, and every dish is a performance for the gods of politics and pleasure. Still, beneath all this sophistication, you sense something ancient. When La Varenne adds a dash of anchovy essence to a sauce, your mind flashes back to Apicius, his garum, his obsession with layering flavor through decay and transformation. You almost smell it ghosting beneath the butter. Perhaps it never left. You notice how the cooks talk about sauces the way poets talk about rhythm, each ingredient a syllable, each texture a verse. One sauce, rich and dark, begins with roasted bones, onions, and herbs, simmered until time itself seems to thicken. Espagnole, someone calls it, one of the mother sauces that would define French cuisine for centuries. And yet, some scholars still debate whether these French inventions were truly new. The bones of Rome are buried deep in every reduction, every aromatic stock. It's as if Apicius's ghost has been whispering recipes through the centuries, reshaping them until they fit Versailles' taste for grandeur. As you wander deeper into the kitchen, the sound of footsteps softens. You find yourself near a small separate chamber, the private kitchen of Marie-Thérèse, the queen. The air here is quieter, almost domestic. A single cook hums softly while tending to a pan of fruit, simmering in honey and wine. The aroma is sweet, comforting. Not everything in Versailles is meant to impress. Some things are meant to soothe. You lean closer and notice the cook's notes scrawled in the margins of a small book. Recipes for jams, custards, and creams, nothing meant for kings or courts. Just gentle food. You wonder if she knows she's preserving more than sweetness. She's preserving humanity in a palace built on performance. Outside, the music grows louder again. You glimpse Louis XIV rising from his seat. The courtiers freeze. A footman rushes to refill the royal glass. The orchestra holds its breath. And you realize something strange. The Sun King doesn't just command armies or ministers. He commands appetite. Every plate placed before him is a declaration of loyalty. Every flavor a gesture of devotion. And when he lifts his spoon, the entire room watches. A soft laugh escapes you. It's funny in a way. Rome once conquered the world through legions. France conquers it through lunch. You glance back toward the kitchen where the cooks have returned to their rhythm. Among them, a young apprentice scribbles notes by the firelight, copying a recipe for sauce velouté. His handwriting is awkward, but his eyes gleam with quiet reverence. That notebook, you realize, could be the next Re Coquinaria, a bridge between centuries. Somewhere above, chandeliers flicker. The court dances, feasts, and flatters itself into eternity. But down here, the real work continues. Butter melts, sauces thicken, history simmers. You can't help but smile, even surrounded by gold and silk. The essence of cuisine remains the same. Patience, curiosity, and a little touch of madness. You step away from the warmth of the ovens, your reflection shimmering faintly in the copper pots. For a brief second, you think you see another face looking back, older, Roman, amused. Maybe it's Apicius again, winking through the steam. He'd probably find Versailles delightful, a place where the art of indulgence never died, only changed its flavor. You take one last breath of that buttery air, letting it settle in your chest. Somewhere between garum and bechamel, between empire and elegance, you realize something. Civilization isn't built on war or stone. It's built on what we choose to savor. And here in the shimmering shadows of the court, that truth tastes eternal. The world outside trembles. The streets of Paris are no longer perfumed with roasted pheasant and sweet almond tarts. They smell of gunpowder, fear, and bread crusts burnt from haste. You hear distant cries, shouts of liberty tangled with the creak of carts, and the clanging of pans hastily abandoned. The revolution has begun, and even the kitchens, once sacred domains of pleasure, are not spared. You find yourself standing in a kitchen stripped bare, no gilded platters, no silver spoons, only soot-stained walls and a pot bubbling on a dying fire. Once this very room might have served a duke or a marquis. Now it belongs to no one. The head cook has fled. The servants whisper that he shaved his beard and joined the uprising. And yet among the ashes you feel something new flicker to life. Freedom. The collapse of the royal kitchens doesn't mean the death of French cuisine. It means its rebirth. You follow a man named Boulanger. Yes, the very one whose name means baker. In 1765, before the storm of the Revolution, he opened a modest shop selling restaurants, restorative broths. The word was humble then, but after the Revolution, it became the new kingdom. The displaced chefs of Versailles and the Tuileries, stripped of patrons but armed with recipes and pride, now served the people. Paris became the world's dining room. You pass through narrow alleys where candlelit rooms are filled with chatter and clinking glasses. There, former royal chefs whisper the secrets of sauces once reserved for kings. A thick soup of lentils is elevated with a swirl of cream. A simple fish stew sings with saffron. The spirit of Apicius breathes through them, that same urge to astonish, to turn hunger into theater. You can almost hear him laugh softly, approvingly over the hiss of butter meeting copper. Outside, posters of liberty flap in the wind. Inside, recipes are rebelling too. Gone are the grotesque displays of opulence, the roasted swans and gilded pies. Now food speaks of equality, one dish for all but seasoned with imagination. You taste it, a broth richer than its ingredients suggest, thickened not by wealth but by ingenuity. The diners don't realize it, but they're savoring centuries of evolution, a quiet conversation between Rome and Paris carried on through spoons and knives instead of words. Still, there's irony in the air. The chefs who once bowed before dukes now serve merchants who brag about simple taste while ordering elaborate feasts. You smile. Revolutions change crowns, but rarely appetites. Somewhere Apicius is smirking too. You wander into one of the first true restaurants. White tablecloths, mirrors, chandeliers saved from some fallen palace. A waiter approaches with a flourish. He recommends a ragu made from veal bones and herbs. The recipe, he says, is old, ancient even. You take a bite and the flavor carries whispers of garum, honey, and wine. The lineage is unmistakable. The Roman soul still stirs beneath the French tongue. Some historians still debate whether French haute cuisine owes its elegance to innovation or inheritance. Did the revolution create it anew, or merely free it from its gilded cage? The answer perhaps simmers somewhere in between, in that perfect balance between chaos and control, rebellion and ritual. You close your eyes. The kitchen hums again, not with orders shouted by nobles, but with laughter and music from commoners sharing a meal they can finally afford. The fire crackles, the broth simmers, and you feel history folding itself like dough kneaded by time and human hands. The revolution may have toppled thrones, but in the kitchen, it crowned the people instead. And as the night deepens, you sense that somewhere in every pot lifted from a Paris stove, Apicius lives, reborn not in marble halls, but in the hearts of those who cook simply, yet dream boldly. You lean against the cool marble of a Parisian kitchen wall, your reflection flickering in a pot of simmering sauce. The chaos of revolution has quieted into something gentler, a hum of new beginnings. Outside, the world rebuilds itself. Inside, the aroma of butter and wine fills the air again. But this time it's different. The food no longer belongs to kings. It belongs to everyone. You follow the sound of a ladle stirring slowly, a rhythm as ancient as Rome itself. The chef hums as he works, dipping a spoon into a pale silken sauce. He calls it bechamel, a name that sounds elegant, almost noble. But as you taste it, you realize something familiar hides underneath. The smoothness, the gentle hint of sweetness, the balance. It feels like the ghost of Alita Dulcia, one of Apicius's old recipes. You can almost hear him whisper through the steam, always chase pleasure but make it look effortless. In the warmth of this small kitchen, centuries seem to fold into one another. What once began in the extravagant villas of Rome now lives in the tidy dining rooms of France. The Roman obsession with texture, balance, and spectacle has found new clothes. Silk instead of marble, copper instead of bronze. The French have turned the grandiosity of the empire into subtlety. Where Rome shouted, France sighs. You stroll down cobblestone streets lined with cafes, each window glowing with candlelight. The menu boards outside are scrawled in chalk. Coq au vin, bœuf bourguignon, tarte tatin. Every dish tells a story that's older than it admits. A rooster braised in wine is not so different from Apicius's peacock in spiced broth. Both celebrate patience, transformation, and the triumph of flavor over simplicity. You smile. The Romans would have approved, though they'd probably add more honey. In one cafe, a young chef wipes his hands on his apron and tells you, almost proudly, "We don't just cook to feed, we cook to charm." That line could have come straight from Apicius himself. The ancient Roman spirit of spectacle, of dining as performance, has simply learned French manners. The feasts are smaller now, the laughter quieter, but the desire to impress, to seduce through food, still burns bright beneath every copper pan. You watch a couple at a corner table share a slice of cheese and a glass of red wine. There's something sacred about it, a quiet ritual repeated across centuries. The ingredients may have changed, but the yearning behind them hasn't. The need to connect, to pause, to feel alive through taste. Food is still the language of desire, still the theater of humanity. Some historians still debate whether the sophistication of French cuisine is a true invention or just a Roman inheritance with better table manners. Did France invent elegance or did it simply perfect it? Perhaps that's the eternal question, and maybe that's what Apicius would have wanted, to keep people talking, arguing, tasting. After all, a recipe is never truly finished. It only travels. You wander into another kitchen, this one brighter, more modern. Copper pans hang like medals, their surfaces reflecting 1,000 years of evolution. A pot of sauce espagnole bubbles quietly, deep and glossy. The chef, with a smudge of flour on his cheek, gestures for you to taste. The richness coats your tongue. Meat, herbs, thyme. "It takes days to get this right," he says softly. You nod because you know it takes centuries. Every corner of France seems to hum with echoes of Rome. The layered sauces, the delicate balance of salt and sweetness. Even the obsession with presentation, they're all descendants of Apicius's old ambition to turn food into poetry. He would have adored this world of chefs who chase perfection not for survival, but for art. You pause by the window. Outside, Paris glows like 1,000 tiny fires. Kitchens, restaurants, homes. Each one carries a spark of the old Roman flame, reshaped and refined. You realize that Apicius's dream, to be remembered not for who he was but for what he tasted, has come true in the most unexpected way. His legacy doesn't live in monuments or tombs. It lives in the hiss of butter, the warmth of bread, the sigh after a perfect bite, and as the night deepens, you sense that time itself is stirring the pot. Rome didn't die. It simmered down, reduced into something rich and velvety, something French. The soul of one became the heart of the other, and in every kitchen where someone whispers, "Taste this," the past and present sit down to dinner together. The kitchen is quiet now. Only the slow crackle of the fire remains, soft as breathing. You stand there surrounded by the ghosts of flavor, thyme, roasted garlic, a faint trace of old wine. Outside the window, night folds itself over the city like a dark linen cloth. The air is heavy with warmth and memory. You can almost hear the echo of ancient footsteps, Roman sandals on marble, clogs on cobblestone, leather soles pacing across Parisian tiles. You stir the pot one last time. The spoon glides through the sauce like a ship across calm water. It's smooth, golden, perfect. Somewhere between the past and the present you realize, this is what Apicius wanted all along. Not immortality through stone or statue, but through taste. A whisper that lingers on the tongue long after the meal is gone. The candle beside you flickers, and for a moment the shadow on the wall looks like him, the Roman gourmand himself, leaning over your shoulder, nodding approvingly. You laugh quietly. "Still here, huh?" you murmur. He doesn't answer, of course, but you feel it. That gentle approval, the kind only a teacher gives when the student finally understands. You take a slow breath. The scent of herbs fills your lungs. If the centuries have taught anything, it's that food never really dies. It transforms. The Roman garum became French anchovy paste. The spiced wine of the empire turned into Bordeaux and Burgundy. Recipes changed names, languages, and hands, but the spirit, that desire to please, to astonish, to make beauty edible, never faded. Across France tonight, kitchens glow with that same light. Copper pans gleam. Bread rises in quiet ovens. A sauce thickens slowly, watched with the same patience that monks once had copying old Latin texts by candlelight. None of them are thinking about Apicius, and yet he's here. In every measured pinch of salt, every slow pour of cream, every sigh of satisfaction that escapes after the first bite. You sit down at a small wooden table. There's a bowl of stew before you, tender meat, onions melted into sweetness, wine simmered down to a dark glaze. You lift the spoon, taste it, and close your eyes. For a heartbeat, the room disappears. You're in Rome, then in a monastery, then at Versailles, then back in Paris. Time has collapsed into flavor. Every century, every hand that stirred, folded itself into this one simple act of eating. Some historians still debate whether Re Coquinaria truly shaped French cuisine, or if the connection is just a beautiful illusion. But maybe history isn't about certainty. Maybe it's about aroma, how something faint but familiar can suddenly fill a room and you just know. You don't need proof to feel the warmth of continuity. You just need to taste it. The fire burns lower. You rest your hands on the table, feeling the grain of the wood, the tiny scratches made by knives and time. The feast of the ages isn't grand anymore. It's quiet, content, eternal. The empire, the monasteries, the courts, the revolutions, they all sit here with you, sharing the same humble table. You lean back. The clock ticks softly. You imagine Apicius smiling somewhere beyond the veil of time, surrounded by every cook who ever borrowed his spirit. Together they form an endless banquet. A feast not of dishes, but of devotion. The devotion to make something beautiful, even fleeting, even ordinary. And in that thought you feel the story slow. The sounds fade. The simmering, the ticking, the soft night wind pressing against the window. Your heartbeat syncs with the rhythm of the world winding down. The kitchen dims into shadow. The warmth lingers. You let your eyes close. The taste of history still gentle on your tongue. The last thing you feel is not hunger but peace, as if the journey through time has finally found its resting place. End of script. Sweet dreams.